target myself, draw a card. Meia.
Original green card advantage, Mulch.
Hi! Oh my
Hello.
god, welcome!
G'day.
And welcome to the next in our series of special guest episodes. And today we have the wonderful Mulch. Hello, welcome. It's
you.
so lovely to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Now, you're a reasonably well-known factor amongst the Melburnian magic enjoyers, for lack of a better term. But tell us a little bit about yourself. What have you started? Because you are as far as I'm aware, you are a regular Pro Tour enjoyer. You are a Highlander aficionado, and you've even dabbled in content yourself. You write a regular blog, I believe, called Mulchy Magic.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't call it regular anymore. I try. Like, I have stints. I have bursts of energy, and then I'll go nuts for a few months, and then work gets the better of me, etc. So.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But you do keep with like semi-regular posting. I read your Edge of Eternity's reviews as well. They were awesome.
Oh, thanks.
But yeah, you've been around the Magic block, so to speak. And I think you said it was 9 Pro Tours.
Yeah, over the years. I mean, it's all by virtue of persistence. Like, you got a probability of getting there. If you just hang in there, then you just show up,
Well, I mean, look.
Obviously, it's a balance.
I was gonna say modesty out of the wonderful mold. That's not entirely true. You do actually have to be good to get on the Pro Tour to some extent.
Yeah.
And maybe the first one was luck, but the 9th one, I think we can definitely put some down to skill.
Yeah. Well, as far as Magic goes, I'm kind of blessed that, like, I don't burn out. I can just keep playing, and the more you play, the better you get, and you keep trying, and eventually you get there. And yeah, it's very rewarding.
Amazing. So you have quite a depth of kind of competitive play experience, whether it be at the, like RCQ and RC level, or like we've said, at like Pro Tour level events, and even in like the non-wizard space, you've played a lot of Australian 7-point Highlander, or format of the people, so to speak.
Love Highlander.
It is, I think, one of the most fun formats of all time.
It's super fun, yeah. Being able to play, the original Power 9 amongst your standard, like fringe playables is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Black Lotus into Barragoyf is pretty good, right?
Yeah, or I know Elspeth Knight Errant.
Oh, 3 white, yes. Such a good card. So in the like Melbourne Magic scene, there is talk of a mystical article that was written many moons ago. And this is an article that's fondly known in the Melbourne community as Magic on Hard Mode. And it details like a couple of tips at like professional Magic level play that are beyond just, playing a little bit tighter. They're things sort of from the external elements of like playing Magic and like playing people a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I believe that article was written in 2014, if I get that right.
Okay.
And it's been a little while since then, and I kind of wanted to pick your brain about how Magic and specifically Magic on Hard Mode has evolved over the course of 10, 15 years, because way back when it was a little bit controversial, but
very controversial.
I feel like these days the things you recommended then are almost commonplace. So how do you feel that Magic on Hard Mode, for starters, what is Magic on Hard Mode and how has it evolved?
Yeah, okay. To set the scene and give you some context, I think I might have still been at university, and I had a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and I started up like my blog, which is my first foray into writing articles, and I was like hungry for ideas, and we were on a road trip to Adelaide to go to a PTQ, a Pro Tour qualifier, like the old school version of how you qualify for the Pro Tour. Like first place gets there. And yeah, we're spitballing ideas in the car, and one of them was Magic on Hard Mode, which is basically do everything you can to, I guess, improve your chances of winning. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack there. But we're playing at a store regularly. We've got a regular crew, lots of time on our hands, lots of enthusiasm, and I almost wrote this. I had no audience when I was writing these articles, except for like my 12 friends or whatever, and so I wrote it as somewhat of a joke for them, and I had a lot of fun writing it. And I think I can't remember how many points or
there were 12 recommendations.
12 recommendations. Anyway, one of them was a controversial one. Like to give you an example, one of them's like, oh, just don't bring out your tokens until you start the match, because then you reveal what tokens you're going to use. Very, very basic stuff. And one of them was like, if you're about to play, one of these old school PDQs I'm talking about, where first place is going to the Pro Tour, and a regular ringer walks up and asks you casually what you're playing, you don't have to tell them. You can just politely say, "Oh, we'll find out if you verse me," or finish your match quick and come see my table. And when you're making content, you got to spice it up somehow. Jokes, you guys know about that. And I added a little joke on the end, it's calling hard mode. So every one of these recommendations, I would like turn it up a bit. Like if you take it to the next level, and the tip of like not telling your potential opponents what you're playing became you could just mislead them. And this comment, I think some of my friends liked my writing, and one of them just put it on Reddit, and it blew up and got like 15,000 views or something. And LSV ended up reading it and commenting on one of the comments, calling like misleading your opponents as to what you're playing is psychopathic. And naturally, like younger men in this Magic store at the time, and I just got called a psychopath incessantly. So
Yep.
And like I read it back, and I'm like, oh, and it's embarrassing. So every time someone mentions the article, I'm like, oh. But you are right. Like some of the things hold true, and a lot of the tips and the general idea of just always trying to improve, not just your play, but everything is kind of helps your game. But Magic on hard mode, so it's an interesting topic because it depends on the person, right? And what do you want out of the game? And you could really break these questions down like on a philosophical level. It's like, what is Magic? What does it mean to you? What are you trying to get out of it? I mean, in this context, we're trying to have our listeners have a good time and maybe take something away from the podcast. So I suppose it's not always about being better at the game. Like, you also want to create a good community. And so I suppose playing clean and tight Magic is not only good for your win percentage, is also it can be good for the community as well. Like if you clearly make your decisions and you're not ambiguous with what you're doing, it makes it better for your opponent as far as play experience goes. It's interesting. It's
almost the expansion of these like Magic related skills into, translating them into something that isn't necessarily just tournament outcomes. Because while that is how it starts, that's not necessarily always the goal. And with Magic on hard mode, the thing that's so fascinating about that original article, and we will link it in the description of the show, is that
my psychopathic article, yeah,
is that the things that you recommend aren't necessarily, it's not the Read Duke Thoughtseize article that talks about the intricacies of like individual decisions, and it's not talking about, how to shuffle your library, 7 riffle shuffles is the correct number, and it talks about things that are sort of external to the nature of play that make your play kind of better as an indirect result of the things that you were doing. And those sort of lessons are really kind of are really useful when applying them outside of Magic. That's part of why Magic's is great. But what I kind of wanted to pick your brain about in particular is how those like recommendations have changed over time. Because tournaments, as you were saying, they look quite different now than they did back in the like PTQ era. You have a lot more digitization of things like deck lists. You have, you know, a lot more of a solidified player base. Like Magic's player base has expanded massively, even just over the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's
but
crazy.
It also means that the community has sort of galvanized. So in this sort of like new era of Magic, how has that approach to like gameplay and Magic evolved, even if it has, you know, toned down from, you know, bolt-faced lying to your opponent about the deck that you're playing?
Well, to be clear, like that was not acceptable back in the day.
No, certainly
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, because I mean, arguably misleading your opponent to what you're playing at a local level, you don't want to do that because you actually want to make them to play as best as possible to give you a more realistic idea of how your deck performs against the field. And especially in this modern day of open deck lists, then, you know, you just want your practice to be as meaningful as possible.
Especially with deck lists being so easily accessible online, right? It's easy to find, you know, the best standard lessons deck list and something close to the best Sultai Reanimator deck list. Whereas, you know, 10, 12 years ago, the actual process of deck building and iteration was a much more considerable part of pushing you towards, you know, success in a competitive setting.
Yeah, well, these days, you know, you go online and, like you said, you find a tight list that's been honed by a whole team of pros. But back in the day, information wasn't as readily available. You didn't have the arena machine churning out tuned lists. Of course, you had Magic Online, but the lists weren't as readily available. And I had the privilege of playing Pro Tour Aether Drift earlier this year. And something I really struggled with was the most enjoyment I get out of Magic is brewing. Like, I love brewing decks and finding something cool, and I don't know what it's called, but
You are a known fringe deck enjoyer.
yeah, like I get tingles from people playing my deck and go, "That's cool." Like, well, you know, I've never seen it before. That's awesome. Well done. And that just disproportionate amounts of dopamine for for that. And so when I qualified for the Pro Tour after many years, I got super excited, and I'm like, "That's it." You know, I'm gonna take a few months off work. I'm gonna go deep and like break standard. I'm gonna try and find every combo I can find. And I like went on this giant pursuit. I had spreadsheets categorizing every archetype you can imagine in standard. And in the end, like it was a huge undertaking on my part.
Well, it's an undertaking normally taken on by like teams of 10 to 15 pro players over the course of months, right? For a single player to like go dive in headfirst into that undertaking is huge.
Yeah, it was many man hours, just me and the spreadsheet and my cat. And in the end, I couldn't find anything that broke the format. And I kind of realized that, and there was this downside of what I'm trying to get to is I ended up being quite cagey about a lot of my ideas, to my detriment. And that was a big lesson I learned. Like, I had so many ideas, and maybe a handful of them had potential, but I was paranoid about wasting people's time and asking them to help me out with pursuing these ideas, because I'd feel bad if they wasted time trying them and it didn't work out, rather than just picking one of these established decks and honing it. And yeah, it was tough. It was an interesting social phenomenon, and the ones that I were really excited about, I was like, oh hey, here's my deck list. I think this is quite good. There's something here, but please don't play it, on a Moto League where you might 5-0 and get published, or whatever the equivalent is on Arena. And that kind of caveat that I put on my requests, I think took away from the enthusiasm of who I was working with, like especially maybe Leonard, Barker, and a couple of the other guys. And yeah, so I'm not sure how I'd do it differently going if I ever qualify again, or just for local formats and tournaments. So I've got to rethink how I approach brewing, I suppose, because at the Pro Tour, you hear about all the big teams being very cagey with what they're playing, especially Worlds, where it's a small meta game. And if a whole team's got to pick up a deck, it can be quite significant. And in this modern age, like, how often have you just received someone posting in a forum saying, "Oh, check out this cool list," and lists spread like wildfire. And so finding the balance of hiding tech, for a big tournament versus playing enough games to refine it is very hard. Finding that balance, yeah.
Yeah, and it speaks a little bit to the like shifting competitive mindset as well, right? Because while big teams going into tournaments are they can be cagey about what they think the best deck is, that is because they're afforded the privilege of 15 of the best players in the world to test against, right?
Yes,
Who have their own ideas about what certain formats are going to develop into, and how quickly they think other teams are going to cotton on to the same sort of archetypes and metagames, and which teams are drawn in different directions. Whereas when you're just one person kind of jamming games, and you don't necessarily have access in the same way to that hyper competitive players. Not to say we don't have hyper competitive players in Australia. We absolutely do.
Yeah.
Team Bus Stop routinely puts people into the Pro Tour. We recently had a World Championship top 4 coming straight out of Melbourne.
Sean Henry
doing a
Shout out.
masterful job. So it's not necessarily for lack of practice, but without that additional resource, it can become very tricky. And deck building has changed into an entirely different beast in an online world.
Absolutely.
The difference between, the best deck and, the slightly different version person X is playing is like a play set of 2 cards. And as opposed to a, entirely new, like, metagame breaking archetype that comes out of nowhere back in an era when publicly available deck lists aren't as big of a thing. Like, for instance, the famous Elves deck that LSV won a Pro Tour with, that kind of came out of nowhere, and the Brian Elemental combo deck, which
that's back in my like peak days, yeah.
Yeah, which is they're very much artifacts of their time, where you could brew entirely new decks and bring them to a Pro Tour and nobody would know.
Yeah.
They'd be like, what is this crazy nonsense? But it's just so much harder to do that these days. So you kind of have to weigh up, if I am brewing and iterating and finding this deck and getting practice with that, is that going to be more beneficial to me necessarily than trying to outsource a lot of that testing and find what little niche pieces get together at the risk of your competitors cottoning on to the ideas that you're having?
Yeah. Well, there's so many factors, like, I realize it's very arrogant of me to assume that, I'm going to be the guy with the tech, right? Like,
Well, I mean, it's fun to try, right? Like, Magic is ultimately a game and is fun, and brewing is really exciting, regardless of whether or not you think you're the best brewer in the world. It's not arrogant to do the part of Magic that you enjoy.
No, absolutely not. a common thing that I hear these days at tournaments is that people do like too much online testing and they rely on it. And then when it comes to paper play, like I'm missing so many triggers. And just the mental gymnastics of doing math with big board states or complex combos is quite taxing. Like Badger Mole Cub mana math, for example, right now. And
Oh, for sure. I think the prime example I go to is like the Richard Owen style Storm deck.
Yeah.
Is so much easier to play on Magic Online, where you had the little counter in the top right corner that ticks up, and you can just go, click this Dark Creature. Oh, I have 4 mana here. It tells me in the corner. And it's kind of the same with Arena, right? Especially with in recent memory, the Temur Lands deck, right?
Yes.
Who knows how much mana I had? I certainly didn't. I was tapping lands here and there. And that makes it easier. But in paper, you definitely do lose a little bit of that edge. And kind of another way that this manifests is in local metagames, right? The Melbourne local meta is not necessarily reflective of kind of like, of the best deck in the format.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, we're quite famed for our combo enjoyers, for lack of a better term. I think at RC, the most recent RC, the modern RC, there was a huge overrepresentation of Amulet Titan just because of the players in the room. It had absolutely nothing to do with whether or not it was the best deck, and I'm sure you could argue that it was, but that is very different to like sitting down for a league on Magic Online. You're going to get a different slew of decks.
Yeah, it was Amulet's a bit harder to play on Moto, I presume, with all the actions you have to take during the combo. So that makes sense.
It is certainly click intensive.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got to play Amulet eventually. Yeah. Been meaning to get into Modern, so pretty excited for that as well. Yeah, that's another factor about the modern game is the formats are just bigger. Like Standard especially. It's quite overwhelming, the amount of cards. It's interesting. It's like you have way more tools, many more cards to brew with, which is fun. And you can almost find a tool to fit any need in a deck. But it also makes brewing harder because you got to dig more. And also, I had this concept of filters. So some cards in a metagame will filter out others. Like, the classic is Flame Tongue Kavu or Jason Mind Sculptor. Like, you can't play a 4-mana 4/4 in a Flame Tongue Kavu format. And I suppose the bigger Standard gets, the more filters there are. Like right now, you probably don't want to play a 3-mana creature that dies to shock and gives you no more value. And
Frenzied Bailoff, no good anymore.
Yeah, so this is just another challenge that comes with brewing, which is quite fun, to be honest. Yeah.
And with all that said, that is all we have for you today. New episodes release every Monday at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. You can keep track of all of our releases at Raise MTG on Instagram and Blue Sky, and you can find myself and Kira on the same platforms at kirabobira.jpg and Meia MTG. You can find Luke's wonderful Magic content at Mulchy Magic at Blogspot. The link will be in the description. And until next week, remember...
But it doesn't do anything.
No, it does nothing.